Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Developing Executive Teams, a Coaching Perspective. I'm Jo Soler and I'm the Marketing Executive here at Ashridge. And I'm joined today by Andrew Day, Dorothy Stoffels and Rachel Hanley-Brown. Now I'll pass over to them in just a few minutes to introduce themselves, but I firstly wanted to run you through a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces and take a look at how we're going to be using WebEx today. Now, you'll see on the slide, I'm also joined by our colleague Andy Copeland, and he's going to be helping us from a technical point of view today and helping out with any issues with WebEx or audio. Now, as you'll see on the screen here, run you through a couple of technical bits. We do recommend that you dial in using the phone line. If at any point you need to get those numbers back, you can click the audio button, which is at the bottom of the participant list, and that will bring up the numbers on screen. Now, you will have noticed that you've been muted on arrival, and that really is just due to the number of attendees we've got on today's session. We don't want that to put you off getting involved. We'd really love to hear your thoughts, comments and questions. So at any point, if you would like to let us know your thoughts, please use the chat panel, which is also on that right-hand side of your screen. If at any point you can't find that, you've got tabs across the top of that right-hand side, and that will help you find the chat. It's the second one, and it's got a little speech bubble. If you type into the white box, make sure you send it to all participants so we can see that, and then click send, and your chat will appear. If you have any technical issues, do the same there, and Andy will be able to help you. Okay. So before I hand over to the presenters today, I thought it might be nice to find out a little bit about you guys and see who we've got on the call today. So Andy's going to open up a poll for us, just a couple of questions we'd like to ask. So one of those is, who do we have on the call today? So what's your job role? What do you do? And the second question is, what brings you here today? So I think it'd be really interesting for us to sort of know what your purpose for coming is, so we can make sure that we endeavour to deliver on that for you. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that, and I think that's probably a really good time for me to pass over the introduction. So Andrew, can I come to you first?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Day. I'm the head of the OD and Change department here at Ashridge. I'm also an executive coach and have worked as a coach for most of my career. And I'm a consultant that works with organisations around change.
Hi, afternoon everyone. I'm Rachel Hanley-Brown. I'm Regional Transition Director at Ashridge, which means that I'm responsible for developing our global business, and I'm also an executive coach.
And that, I think, leaves me. Hello, everyone. My name is Dorothy Stoffels, and I'm an organisation and development consultant, member faculty, and also coach for Ashridge, with a particular interest in team coaching. And prior to joining Ashridge, I worked as a systemic psychotherapist, and I bring my systemic approach to my work. And here at Ashridge, I work with clients across the private and public sector in different areas such as leadership development, organisational change, and also the training and supervision of coaches.
Okay, thank you. Just to point out that we are recording today's session, and it will be available on the Ashridge website, hopefully by the end of the week. I'll be sending out a link to that recording and the slides, so just to let everyone know that before we carry on any further. Okay, I'm going to ask Andy to share those poll results. We'll have a look at who's with us today. Just give us a couple of seconds to let those come up. Okay, so it looks like we've got a number of L&D professionals with us today and HR professionals. We do have a few external and internal coaches, not too many at the minute. Maybe more will join later, and we've got some OD and talent management people with us. In terms of what people are looking for ways to enhance skills to deliver greater business impact, also looks a bit more about understanding team coaching, and really to further everyone's learning in general. So that's really interesting for us to know. I think that probably leads me nicely on to looking at the agenda for today and what we've got in store for you. So we split today's session into 3 sections. Section 1 We'll look at what makes an effective team, looking into sort of what's happening within a team when it's working well, and what might happen to take teams off track and derail them. Then we'll be looking at the role of the team coach. So what kind of characteristics do we think a team coach should bring, and what would their role be within that coaching sessions? And then section 3, when should you use a team coach? So we'll take a little bit of time to have a discussion on that. Then at the bottom there, you'll see throughout, we would really love to hear your thoughts, questions and observations. So please do keep those coming in via the chat. Rachel and I will be monitoring that chat and bringing any questions in at any point if we think they're relevant. We'll also make sure we leave a little bit of time towards the end for a proper Q&A session. Okay, so that really leaves me to move to Andrew and ask him what makes an effective team.
Well, good afternoon. So I think a sensible starting point when thinking about teams is to consider what do we mean by effectiveness. And on the face of it, I think most of us would say, well, that's, we all know what an effective team is. But when we start to deconstruct it and consider the question, it becomes more complex. So firstly, I think many people would have heard or seen the book by Kackenbach and Smith, The Wisdom of Teams, which was written in the early 90s. And I think this was a really key text in organizations around introducing some research around what makes an effective team. And they pointed to 6 dimensions: having a meaningful purpose, shared commitment within the team, clear and specific goals that are agreed upon, having the right skills and interchangeable skills within the team, mutual accountability, and then clear norms within the team that inform behaviours that were linked to performance. Now this, for me, is a good enough starting point. It gives some tangible and visible qualities that we might think about when looking at a team and thinking about where do we start. I think the thing that, from our perspective, is different to how we think about teams. This is a rather static model. And our way of looking at teams is much more considering teams to be a dynamic entity in a dynamic context. So really thinking about what's going on within the team, how is the team interacting, engaging with its broader environment, the organization, and how does the team need to adjust and change over time? So give you a flavor. I think when you start to look at executive teams, you can see the complexity that emerges around the goals that the team might face. And for me, the important thing that indicates health in an executive team is their capacity to balance different tensions and pressures around the goals it's trying to achieve. So we might look at the goals of the executive team in looking at growth, profit, the long-term development of the organization, attending to different stakeholder interests and needs, such as unions, board members, shareholders, employees, and then also looking after the long-term interests of the organization, its reputation within the world, we might think of. So when you look at effectiveness from that perspective, we could go back and look at the financial crisis perhaps and the leadership of various banks. And we might say that before the crisis, some of these teams were seen to be effective because they'd really achieved high levels of profitability and growth. However, longer-term analysis of those organizations suggests that they were imbalanced in terms of what they considered to be effective. And over the longer term, then that's had, well, profound and significant consequences. So for us, an executive team, or any team, if you like, is a dynamic entity, and effectiveness needs to build in the capacity to learn. And why that's important is in a constantly changing world, the team's ability to adjust, respond to what's happening in its environment, and shift its own internal dynamics accordingly becomes increasingly important. In addition to looking at effectiveness, I think we can understand teams by thinking about when they derail. And in our experience, and in preparing for this seminar, Dorothy and I were thinking about, well, when do executive teams tend to derail in our experience? And what we noticed was quite often it's at periods of transition, a period of change for the team and the organisation. So this might be when a leader is retiring, leaving the organisation, a new leader is coming in to take up the position, a key member leaves, new members join, there is a restructuring, there's a period of cultural or strategic change. So these are all different forms of transition when the executive team needs to shift and change how it's interacting and working together. Now, some of the derailers that we see that emerge during this period are because underlying dynamics in the team have not been resolved. And what's happening is in the period of transition, something is being amplified or becoming more apparent that was, perhaps we could think of, was existing below the waterline, somewhere outside of the kind of day-to-day discussion and conversation of the team. So the first set of derailers that we can see relate to leadership. So this is the tension, if you like, between leaders and followers relating to the process or the dynamic of power and authority and how it's exercised in the team. So quite often we might see power struggles for leadership and control. The converse of that is an absence of leadership, where there's a reluctance for anyone to differentiate themselves and exercise some form of influence or control on the team. Or there's an idealization of the leader, such that the leader is put on a pedestal and isn't questioned, and we might think of blind followership from that perspective. The other set of derailers relates to what we might think about is member relations. So here we're interested in how individuals within the team are relating to each other. There might be excessive competition. We might have a phenomenon which is referred to in the literature as groupthink, but this is when a highly cohesive team fails to critique its own thinking or look at different perspectives. This is based on the work of Irving Janis, who looked at the Bay of Pigs disaster and how the Kennedy cabinet of the US government failed to question its own judgment and the assumptions it was making, which led to quite significant and disastrous consequences. Other dynamics which we see between members within the team are either an avoidance of conflict or the expression of difference, or too much or excessive conflict between two or members, or scapegoating or blaming of individuals inside the team or outside of the team. And these are all patterns that you see emerging in the dynamics of teams that are potential derailers. The final perspective on derailers looks at how the team itself is interfacing or relating to the external world, engaging with and relating to other teams and groups. And here we can think of the derailers of failure to learn from experience, where individuals or the team itself keeps repeating the same behaviors in an attempt to bring about an outcome, a change, if you like, but is unable to appreciate or consider the consequences of those actions. And I think we can all see or think about examples from our experience of leadership teams that have seemed to be making the same mistakes over and over again without really being able to stand back and question the assumptions that they're making. And the final one, which relates to the previous one, is becoming executive teams who become disconnected from the organization. They've suddenly, in a sense, they've got out of kilter with the organization, not able to sense into the mood or the tone of the organization or what people need or are prepared to follow. So there's some of the derailers or the key derailers that we see in our experience. And I think we can all think about examples of where the leadership team of the organization, its ineffectiveness, if you like, seen through this lens, casts a significant shadow over the organization, which has real and significant consequences for the organization itself.
Thanks, Andrew. That's great. It's a really good introduction. I guess probably something that's occurring to lots of people listening is, what's unique about this way of looking at teams from Ashridge's perspective? And Dorothy, please feel free to jump in as well. That'd be really great.
Well, I think the uniqueness of this perspective, perhaps to reiterate an earlier point, is looking at teams and groups as dynamic entities, where we're interested in the ongoing pattern of interaction between the members of the team and its environment, if you like, and trying to understand how the team needs to shift its dynamics in the context of a shifting world.
I think it's about the appreciation that things move around all the time, and we as team coaches, and we will say more about this later on, really work with that moving and shifting environment and the dynamic of the team.
Great, thank you.
So if I can build on this a little bit more, a kind of a relational perspective is what I think I'm articulating here around groups and teams. And this framework that I want to share starts from the basis or the assumption that a group exists to perform a task. That task might be quite clear or it might be quite ambiguous, but we can think that all groups and teams require something that they need to do together, a shared purpose, if you like, that brings it into existence. And for the executive team, at a high level, that is to manage or organize the organization to perform and achieve its goals. Now, the other perspective that comes in is that the team itself needs to perform effectively its task whilst also managing the relationships between the members of the group. So we can think that any team is a group, and the different members of that group bring with them their own needs, histories, tendencies, if you like, desires. Quite often those patterns of belonging to a group are shaped by their earlier histories of belonging to and being members of groups, and obviously the first group that we're a member of is the family group, of whatever shape or form that is. So we bring with us our past. And the role of the leader, perhaps, is to pay attention to the task that the group exists to perform, whilst also trying to maintain the group and manage this tension that emerges between the needs and the demands of the task and the needs of the members of the group and how they're interacting together. And the risks, I guess, for any team is that it becomes too preoccupied with the task and achieving its goals at the expense of the needs of its members, or it becomes so preoccupied with meeting the needs of its members and satisfying each other that the task is either avoided or forgotten. So again, what I'm trying to think about here is the idea of balance and the ideas of the group being a dynamic entity formed through the interactions of a group of individuals who come together to perform a task.
Okay, so let's move on and think about what really helps a team to develop. So this is about what conditions do they need. And we talked quite a bit earlier about sort of this idea of learning to learn. So there's a number of things that we feel is really important. For example, having time and space for review and learning. So often we would suggest to people that they maybe go off-site, that they move away from their usual environment, to just give themselves some space to do some of the thinking and some of that learning together. And that will help have some clear and bounded space. So this is about really talking about being, confidential together and not sharing what's happening in the room, to make it safe for people to open up and talk about really important things. And also to start to create some awareness and heighten that awareness, to really think about, okay, so what's going on between us? Let's look at how we interact, how we talk to each other, and reflect on how we work together as a group. And also reflect on how we're doing the task, so how are we going about our work together. And another aspect of what we see really helps teams to develop is to start taking some risk with each other. So being open about what am I thinking and feeling in this moment, and sharing that together in meetings. and having real conversation and starting to give each other some feedback. You know, this is how you are impacting on me. This is what you say or what you do. This is what it evokes in me. And it's about being really true and authentic in those moments. And finally, there's something for us about listening and valuing perspectives. So often teams, in my experience, believe that, you know, they need to agree on everything, that they need to have consensus. But sometimes difficult perspectives can bring a new richness and diversity to a team, which is really important in making the organization move forward and grow. So ultimately, for us, what helps a team develop is the capacity to learn and how to grow. So where does the team coach fit into all of this? So the way we think about a team coach is the team coach is very much a catalyst, you know, a catalyst who can create some sort of chemical reaction that allows a change or push a change within a group, someone who can make something happen and make the different parts of the group shift and change. And for us, being a catalyst is not necessarily just about what we do as coaches, but also about who we are. And this very much leads me to talk about presence. So when we think about who the team coach is, there's something for us at Ashridge about the team coach having a real presence. And what we mean by that is that the team coach is authoritative and confident. So there's someone who's really grounded in who they are as a person, who can stand in front of a team and work with the team and hold their own. And someone who brings their full self. So someone who can be in the moment and really pay attention to the nuances in the group and what people say and how they react. And someone who can really connect individually to individual members of the group, but also to the whole of the group. So someone who brings all the aspects of themselves as a person to their work. And that includes for us a willingness to be vulnerable. So that a team coach can also talk and think about some of their vulnerabilities and share some of that with the group to enable the group to talk about some of their vulnerabilities. Maybe share something that they're picking up or that's going on for them. And that leads me to talk about courage and risk-taking. So often when I work with teams or groups, one of the things I would do in order to take risks and encourage that within a group is to talk about what I'm noticing, both in terms of what's going on in the team, but also about what my response is to that. What am I feeling in this moment? Is something that's being said or not being said creating some anxiety, or am I picking up some anger somewhere? So I would put this out there and use that as a way of working with the group. And in that sense, it's really important for any team coach to be authentic and real when they're with the team, so that they, as we said before, bring their full self. And finally, really, there's something about a willingness to be different and to disturb. And for me, that's often a sense of bringing some difference to the group. So bringing a new element, maybe something that's slightly challenging the status quo in the team. But not too much to really alienate people, but just enough to give people a little push.
Yes, I think in my experience is as a team coach, what you're trying to do is bring the smallest possible disturbance that is going to enable something to happen, or a kind of bigger disturbance within the group, such that it's not going to overwhelm people and cause too much anxiety, such that people are kind of trying to suppress things and revert to their comfort zone. But it will encourage people to take that small step towards talking about what they need to talk about.
Andrew, what sort of thing would you do to cause that disturbance? I'm sure people are intrigued to know that.
Well, it could be. Thank you. it could be one of a number of things. But what I'm trying to sense into or notice is what is the group avoiding here or not confronting. And so what might be a small invitation that I could make that would raise the group's awareness to this issue. So it might be something as simple as bringing to the group's attention that they're talking about stuff outside of the room, and not talking about themselves, which implicitly is an invitation for them to notice that what they need to talk about is inside the room and not outside the room.
Thank you.
I mean, a small example I can give is, and it might sound quite ridiculous, but actually is often very effective, is doing something about changing the usual seating arrangements.
Yeah.
So often my experience is that teams sit behind desks and like the security of that. And some of the interventions that I've done have involved in creating a new space, for example, saying, can we lose the tables and can we just sit in a circle so we don't have anything in front of us? And sometimes just sort of making some changes in the physical environment can really make a difference and disturb something and open new spaces up. So should we talk some more about what the role of the team coach is? So this is going to now go more into what we might do as a team coach. So for us here at Ashridge, there is something about helping to create the necessary conditions for growth. So creating a space where there's safety and trust possible, where there's enough time to really talk about important things that are going on for the team. And at the same time, there's something about role modeling real conversations. So I referred to that a little bit earlier in terms of the presence of the coach. For me, this is very much about sharing what's going on and what I'm observing, for example, when I'm with the team, what I'm noticing, maybe about who speaks, who doesn't speak. There's something about noticing what's going on inside me and sharing that as a way of giving information and new information into the team that they can then work with. And again, the point coming back to the learning from experience, there's something really important about a team coach to facilitate that process of learning from experience. So this is about enabling the team to reflect on their current experiences, whether that's in the organization or whether that's within them as a team, helping them to make sense of that, and then encouraging them to try something new out, to experiment, to maybe say different things, behave slightly differently. All of these things can be really helpful to a team. And then there is something about raising awareness of patterns. So I would often do this by initially sitting with the team and noticing how they work together, how they go about making decisions or discussing strategy, and offering some feedback to the group about what I'm noticing.
And encouraging them to notice their own patterns as well, I think.
Absolutely. I think there's something about the team coach modeling this initially and therefore heightening the awareness of the team to, when they go forward, to do that themselves. And again, we talked quite a bit about difference. So, as a team coach, we don't just want to model it, but also we want to encourage the team to bring out their own difference, so that they can start talking about not agreeing and that actually feels okay. And that different perspectives are valued and actually taken seriously.
I wondered, we hadn't planned this, but I wondered if talking a little bit about circular questioning from a systemic perspective might link to that point.
Sure. Yes, we can talk about that. So for me, circular questioning is a method that's often used within systemic psychotherapy, and it's really about getting people to comment on what they may be noticing between other people. So if they can really see how people are agreeing all the time or disagreeing, that, as a question I might ask someone, what do you notice about those two team members, to really get them to highlight what the differences are. Or it might be around not so much exploring why something is happening, but what different behaviors are being brought out by a certain thing that's being discussed. So that might be one way of sort of bringing out some difference and really highlighting and commenting on it. And I think finally, there's something about challenging assumptions. So I think in my experience, certainly a lot of teams make huge assumptions, both about each other, but also about different teams within the organization, so different parts of that sort of organizational system. And often it's an important role of the team coach to really highlight those assumptions and ask about it, and again, sort of asking, some circular questions around, so, what meaning are you giving this, or what belief is behind this, or do you think is behind this, can really help bring out some of the assumptions. So I think ultimately for us, all of these activities that a team coach might undertake while it's being with the team has really the purpose of making oneself redundant. We really want the team to learn how they can do some of those things by themselves. So all of what we do would be very, very facilitative in order to facilitate that learning process for the team.
So to come back to an earlier point, what we're trying to build up is the team's capacity to learn for themselves.
Great, and that links in nicely what we've just been talking about to some comments and questions that we've had from the participants. So a question about diversity, which, so noticing difference, that's a key thing around diversity. And then another question around, is the team coach always an external person? So perhaps either of you would like to respond to those two questions.
Well, when I saw that question come up, I was thinking about, where I've coached in the past. Previously joining Ashridge, this is some time ago, I worked as an internal OD consultant at Ford, and I had a number of clients that I worked with. I think in those days we called it process consulting rather than team coaching, but in effect what I was a team coach to some of the management teams. So I don't think we're using the term to mean internal or external. I think there's some aspects of the role as we've described it that it's easier to take up if you're an external, and there are other aspects of the role that are easier to take up if you're an internal. For me, it's about being aware of the implications of being an internal and the implications of being an external, particularly around difference, what that difference means within the organisation, and how much one is able to bring one's difference.
I think for me, again, similar to what you're saying, Andrew, there's, pros and cons for either. Sometimes, internal team coaches are really useful because they know the system so well. However, I think an external team coach can bring a new sense of curiosity. And I often notice that, sometimes when you come in as an external team coach and you don't know that much about the organization, it can be really helpful because it means you can ask some really curious questions. They might sound a bit like stupid questions, but when you ask these questions, it's amazing how teams then really have to start thinking about why they're doing things the way they are doing it. So I think, an external coach for me can bring a real sense of curiosity, and I always think that's an advantage.
Great. And just moving on now, about the team itself, thinking about them, how would you know when a team might be ready for coaching?
Well, I think the first point I would take is the request that one would receive. So for me, the judgments that I make is the level of openness on the part of the leader to engage in a process of team coaching, their understanding of what team coaching involves, but ultimately they have to be stepping into a process where they want to hear and understand other people's experience and share and talk about their own experience. So there needs to be a level of openness, well, a good enough level of openness and trust, because part of the work at the start needs to be to build those conditions. So they were the immediate things that come to my mind.
I think our next slide really helps with that sort of question as well. We decided to include it today in this webinar because we think it's actually quite a helpful sort of model. Sometimes it's really hard for teams to decide kind of what sort of support or input they need at a particular point in time, and I think this model really helps to think about that. So if we look at the sort of bottom where we have the sort of manager, leader, facilitator, and team coach, and then we look at these sort of diagonal areas. So what we would say is, if a team really needs to decide on some issues around sort of content, so what are we doing, how's our strategy, how are we moving forward? So that's the sort of area that we would very much call content. This is really something where a manager, can really work with the team and help the team forward in that area. whilst as we're moving more into the task process, so this would be looking at how are we actually going about doing what we need to be doing. You know, we're moving much more into sort of maybe needing someone who's got leadership capabilities and a leadership role, so someone who can move beyond just looking at, you know, what's the task here, but also can look at how are we going about doing this task. And then as we move sort of further to the right, you know, where we're really talking about group processes. So this is about how are we together as a team? You know, how are we interacting? What are we doing together? What gets in the way? All of these things that we sort of talked about earlier on. You know, that at that point, you really would want to have a team coach work with you. And yes, the team coach will need some understanding of the content and the task, and also will help the team think about, you know, what the task, the processes around the task. But ultimately, you know, this is about really helping the group function better.
So I can see some of the questions coming through and observations. I mean, one was, you know, around, I can see a kind of pattern of responses around what it felt like to be coached as a member of a team. And I was thinking through, as I'm part of a management team at Ashridge, since we had a team coach working with ourselves. And my experience of that was, at times it was extremely helpful, and at other times it was quite challenging, really, because it was, you know, what if you're engaging in the process, and by signing up and saying, okay, we want to do this, you're saying, well, actually we want to have an honest and frank conversation with each other. So my experience of that was not always easy. And there were some conversations in hindsight that we weren't able to have, and probably could and should have had. And I can look back and I can see the coach was working quite hard at times to try to help us have that conversation. And I think we were unwilling to go there at times. But there were other conversations we had that really did make a difference.
And I think I would add, I mean, one of the things that I often sort of pay particular attention to is how do I connect with the individuals in the team, but also how do I connect with the whole team? So there's something about trying to maintain a sort of equal connection and an equal relationship with everyone, you know, to not sort of favor particular you know, positions or perspectives, but to kind of maintain that sort of, I hesitate to use the word neutrality, because I believe we can't ever be fully neutral, but to sort of balance the pull into different directions. And for me, I think that's really important in terms of making a team coaching experience a positive experience for the whole team.
So I think we're going to move on to think a bit about intervention. You know, what are some of the things that, as a team coach, one might focus on or think about doing, or maybe not doing, because not intervening is as much an intervention as the intervention itself. I think one of the kind of principles or axioms to bear in mind is, when I'm working with a group, is trying to observe what I see happening and thinking about, does that influence the effectiveness of the group, the extent to which the group is able to perform its task? Because there's a lot that goes on in teams and a lot of dynamics that we can observe which don't immediately seem to have an impact on the effectiveness of the team. And we could spend quite a lot of time and energy picking up on kind of interpersonal conflicts or difficulties or sensitivities that really are best left unattended, whilst there's others which really are influencing how the group performs its task. And it's at that level that, you know, we're trying to intervene, because that's what is going to bring about some improvement of effectiveness. And the three levels to think about of interventions is, one is at the level of the content. You know, what is being spoken about? What are the decisions that the group is trying to make? What are the kind of dilemmas or issues that the group is grappling with? And so one might intervene at that level, trying to help the group notice what is being discussed, what isn't being discussed, you know, perspectives on a decision that are being heard by the group or aren't being heard. As a team coach, one tries to stay out of the content and think more about how is the content being grappled with and being engaged with. So how is the group working with its task? The next level is around group process. So this is the interactions that happen at the level of a group as a whole or between individual members of the group around questions of leadership, how leadership is taken, followership is enacted, questions of competition, how difference is expressed, what differences members of the group are willing to bring, the level of intimacy or disclosure within the group. And then the final level is what we might think about structure. You know, what are the roles that are taken in the group? Are those roles appropriate? To what degree are the roles clear? And are there roles that are absent from the group which need to be taken? Or are people stepping into roles to perform a kind of psychological purpose on behalf of the group, which stops the group actually grappling with something or dealing with something itself?
There's lots and lots of chat going on, which is fantastic. We love to see that. Lots of questions about co-coaching, and I think, Dorothy, you were keen to respond to that.
Yes, I saw one of the questions, certainly. I think that was asking whether we had any experience of co-coaching. And I actually have to say often it's my preferred way of working, because I think, you know, two people often see a lot more in a team than one person does. And I often work with colleagues in a way that one of us will almost take a bit more of a back seat and more of a sort of observer role, really noticing the patterns within a team, whilst the other one might be a bit more active and facilitate more of the conversation. And what can be really helpful and actually really powerful intervention is for the team to actually spend some time listening to the two coaches talking to each other in front of them, to talk about what they've noticed and what their experience has been in the team, and then giving the team the opportunity to reflect on that. So I'm quite in favour actually of co-coaching a team, and equally I think it can be a challenge sometimes, because you will work with another coach who might want to take the group a little bit in one direction, and you're noticing something else and you'd like to take them in a little bit into a different direction. So I think it's about also kind of, if that's the situation, to really pay attention to how you're working together as a pair with the team. And often what goes on between you can tell you quite a bit about what's going on in the team. We sometimes talk about a parallel process, so it can be really, really powerful experience.
Thanks, Dorothy.
So we're kind of coming to, we touched on this question earlier about when to use a team coach. I mean, I'd link back to what we were talking about earlier around derailers and periods of transition. So at an organizational level, I think team coaching is very helpful during periods of transition, either new leaders coming in, going out, but also periods of strategic and cultural change, and helping leadership teams to play a role, and seeing their role is as a team leading a change rather than as individuals leading the change. So that's one perspective on when it's useful and to think about what team coaching might help. And the other perspectives that we have are kind of the different requests that we get. We notice that you get one set of requests which are the, oh great, I'll take that one, which is the teams that are performing well and they really want to fulfill their potential. So, this is a kind of request of, how can we be even better than we are at the moment? And we want you to come and help us to achieve that. They're always the kind of requests that one wants. The more challenging ones, I guess, from my experience, are when the team is really derailing or has derailed or is in the process of derailing, and there's something happening in the group itself that we could label or we could think about as dysfunctional, problematic. The group is stuck in some form of repetitive pattern that it seems unable to get out of. And then as a coach, you're being asked to come in and help the group to confront or deal with something that it seems it's unable to deal with itself.
And that's interesting, Andrew, because again, looking at some of the questions that are coming through, I noted earlier on there was someone mentioning about how do you deal if there's a particularly resistant person within the team or the group. And I guess also this brings to mind, you know, when is the right time? Would you walk away from a group? How would you exit? Would you recommend another coach if it's not working well? So have you got any thoughts around that?
To pick up the first one, the question really around if there was a particular sort of, I don't know what the word that was used, a tricky sort of member of the team. I mean, for me, what this would evoke, first of all, is curiosity. Right. I would really want to know what's going on for that person, and is, you know, what is this about, and is this something about their position or their role within the team, or is this maybe something about the way I work as a coach? You know, is there something going on between me and that person? And I think I would probably approach this by spending a little bit of time with that person to just get a sense of what might be going on, and noticing that maybe they're not as engaged in the process as other people are, or you know, that they've been silent, you know, and just get a sense of what's going on, maybe individually, you know, and sometimes, you know, we can make assumptions that it's somehow about that person, you know, within the group, but it could also be something that's going on sort of privately for them. And I think then if it is about the team and their position in the team, there might be a little bit of work with that individual to just help them express it within the team coaching sessions, you know. But equally, I would say it's also really important to keep boundaries and not start an individual coaching relationship with that individual. So I think, you know, this you know, brings me back to my point earlier about sort of having sort of a certain level of equality in relationships between all the different team members. But I think we do have a duty of care and, you know, and to connect with that individual.
And I would, from a dynamic perspective, I would be curious about, if we think about an individual who's resistant or is manifesting some behaviour that the other members of the group are seeing as problematic, of being a manifestation as much as a group dynamic as that individual. So I can think about one team that I worked with where the dominant discourse within the group was around how another member of the team was the problem. And how it became very hard for me as a team coach to, either in my kind of conversations with the group as a whole or as individuals in kind of preparing for when we work together, to kind of shift the conversation away from the kind of belief that the team would be fine so long as this individual changed their behaviour and did something different. I mean, in systemic therapy, we would talk about the assigned patient, but you know, I see this all the time in groups and teams, is where one member of the group is assigned the problem that the group is actually grappling with. So it might be you're the incompetent one. So that means that the group does not have to engage with its vulnerabilities around competence or disclosure or something along those lines.
Actually, another comment that's coming out is about contracting, which might be interesting to explore, about how you contract as a team coach.
That is a very interesting question, and I have to say I'm not sure whether I have a blanket answer for that, because I think it really depends on the situation. So I think it depends a little bit, in a way, who's the member of the membership of the team. So, for example, the question is a leader within the team or is a leader without the team, outside of the team. So, you know, for example, would the work just include the team without a leader or everyone together? I think that sort of has an impact on how and who I would contract with. And there's also some, you know, there's always for me the question in my mind about, well, actually, who wants this team to be coached? So, you know, who's in a way, the referring person. So often I think there's a piece of work with that person and a contract with that, you know, particularly if they're not part of the team. So for me, that would be very much around, well, actually, can we hold boundaries around confidentiality? You know, do they expect a kind of report or some feedback of how it's going, and how do we manage and negotiate that with the team? So I'm thinking particularly about a team of health managers who I worked with, where the sort of the person who wanted the coaching, their manager, was outside of the team. So there was a really careful piece of contracting initially with her around what level of confidentiality and safety I could offer the team, and then a big piece of contracting with the team, who were all very, very anxious about me reporting things back. And we almost spent the whole first coaching session, just around that sort of particular contract. And as it happens, it was this psychological safety around confidentiality was actually a massive theme within the organization. So in a way, you know, what we were saying earlier, what Andrew was saying, is actually in this case, the team was enacting something that was really important for the whole organization.
We've got a question here around, we've talked about systemic approaches, and obviously bearing in mind this is a learning WebEx and we want to share our knowledge. They're asking who would they recommend that they look at from around a systemic approach for reading?
Oh. Well, there's an awful lot of people, I think. So you could simply put it into Google and see what comes up. But a good book that I've read recently was by, I think I've got the author right, Christine Thornton, who wrote a book on team coaching, and it's from a systemic psychodynamic perspective. It's very accessible, gives a good range of theory, but it's quite practical as well. One could also, you know, look at some of the literature from the Tavistock Institutes around kind of psychoanalytic views of looking at groups. From Dorothy?
I would say sort of from the systemic psychotherapy literature, the Milan Team, it was an Italian team who developed sort of concept around sort of what we call circularity, so really include an interconnectedness, so including every part of the system into work, and talked about circular questioning, which I referred to earlier, so a way of questioning that includes everyone within the system. So the Milan Team might be a good bit of literature to sort of look at. And I know there is at least one article available online freely around circular questioning, which is very helpful, and I've used in training team coaches. So, you know,
who's the author for that? Do you know?
I don't know it at the top of my head, but if you Google circular questioning, actually, I think it does come up. So that would be my recommendation.
We can make sure actually that we send some recommended reading with the follow-up to the webinar. So we'll make sure we do that. I'm just wondering whether we're coming up towards we've got 5 minutes left or so, and we've had lots of chatter, which is great. And I'm just wondering whether Dorothy or Andrew, you have any sort of further thoughts or anything sprung to mind as we've been talking? I think we've had a very wide-ranging conversation.
Well, I think it's sometimes helpful to think about when not to engage a team coach, because there's several times in my career when I've been invited in to say, you know, can you work with this team? And either I didn't pick it up, or I did. But what became quite apparent is that it's a structural problem, that the team dynamics are a consequence of a structural issue within the organisation. Either, you know, there's too many individuals on the team, the wrong individuals are on the team, key roles are not represented on the team. So there's one theme I have in mind as I'm talking here, and, you know, it's terribly dysfunctional, but the main reason for that is, you know, the right people just aren't on the team, and no amount of team coaching is going to address that problem. So that's just a thought that I have coming to the end of this seminar.
And I'm sort of sitting here reflecting what questions we had and what we've been talking about. And I think for me, often the important thing about coaching and team coaching in particular is really what we talked earlier and what we talked about under presence, is that it's not, you know, it's not about bringing a a sort of a variety of particular techniques to a team, or you know, particular models that you can go through. I think for me the really important thing in team coaching, and particularly when people make decisions around engaging a team coach, is actually thinking about having someone who can work with what's happening in the moment, you know, who can really kind of be there for the team, notice what's going on, and respond to whatever the team in a way brings and throws at them. So for me, that's a really key element really to team coaching.
Thanks, Dorothy. And I think that actually ties in very nicely with a comment someone's made about how do team coaches look after themselves and keep themselves safe. And I think we'd all say supervision.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think supervision, when I saw that question come up, I did think that, you know, I do individual coaching and I do work with groups, and I always find that working with groups is much more exhausting and tiring than one-to-one coaching. That might just be me, but what I suspect is if you're working with a group, the level of projections and the emotional intensity that is going on, particularly when you're working with a group to kind of look at itself, means that you're going to take some of that on and hold it on behalf of the group, or stuff is going to be evoked for you from your own history and your past. And so supervision is one way of looking after yourself. I think as well as making sure that you're well supported in your professional network, and there are people that you can, you know, I can think of a piece of team coaching I did that it was very difficult, and some of the feedback I personally got was very challenging, and I was able to pick up the phone to one of my colleagues who I really respect and get a lot of help from. And we spent half an hour on the phone, and I just said, look, I knew I couldn't get to supervision. I said, look, I just need to talk to you about this, and I know it's really affecting me. So that was just kind of one way that I find is helpful for me to do this work.
And I think it also links to a point that we discussed earlier about co-coaching. And you know, I personally, for example, if I know that I'm working with a team which really has some very big, I would say, psychological challenges, I think sometimes I would insist on working with someone else. So as a way of looking after myself and you know, looking after my colleagues. So I think for me there's also a big support in that sort of co-coaching structure.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's addressed all the questions and chat that we've had in, or well, a large proportion of it. There's been lots going on, which is great. I'm going to hand over to Jo now to wrap up. And thanks very much, Dorothy and Andrew.
And thank you everyone for joining the call today.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick wrap up. I'm hoping, if I can bring up on screen now, we'd love to have your feedback on today. We're always looking to improve and see what we can do to help bring you more of what you want and what you're looking for. So if you wouldn't mind, before you leave, just filling out that very quick online questionnaire for us. Very much appreciated. So yeah, all that's really left for me to say is thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much to our panel of speakers. We hope you've learned something. I certainly have. So have a really good rest of your day. Thank you very much, everyone.